but that was the first time that I ever. That's when I really learned to appreciate the tie between building something, renting it, and getting income and paying salaries. And if that wasn't working, then you really got to deal with the bank. And so I used to speak with the bank almost daily back in those days. And as far as Carson was concerned, you're on your own. And but he'd sweep the cash every 24 hours. So he made it pretty exciting, but we got through it all. So.
And Fidenham?
And then, after that, I actually went up. So I left there in '79, and I spent a year in Ottawa, in the Prime Minister's office in the short-lived government of Joe Clark, and so I'd been very involved with politics all through the '70s. I was basically functioned as what they call the wagon master, the tour organizer. So I was not consulted often on foreign policy, but where's the venue and how's everybody going to get there, and that was the stuff that I did.
Jerusalem wasn't your idea.
No. No. And so I did 2 campaigns for Bill Davis, and I did 2 then for Bob Stanfield, and 2 for Joe Clark, and then I finished up the last sort of political activity I had was Mulrooney's leadership campaign, and so it was through all that association that they asked me when Joe got elected. I'd sort of been a volunteer running his tour, sort of donated my time donated by the company, and it was a pretty small it was a minority government with a pretty slim margin. So they figured they'd be back in tour mode before very long, and so they asked me if I'd go up to Ottawa and work out of the Prime Minister's office. And turned out, 4 or 5 months later, that he was out, and I had to stay on and deal with a lot of the contract staff. So it's one of those things where you sit there and with the pleasant task of letting everybody else go, and then as soon as you finish that, they let you go. But that was all in the cards. I knew that, so it was. But that was a fascinating time in terms of when you talk about contacts and the people I met traveling the country in those days. They kept popping up all through my business career. For several years, I couldn't walk through an airport without seeing, several people I knew. But as time goes on, that diminishes. But and a couple of times they turned out to be very helpful. I remember when we were trying to buy the CBC lands. There were some people I'd known all through that were now there, and most of the lobbyists in Ottawa are old friends of mine, and so it's amazing. Those things do come back. You never know where those relationships are going to pay off.
We'll talk about networking in a minute. You never thought of going in front of the microphone and running?
No. Well, I did, I guess, but then I would go into the House of Commons when we were in Ottawa, sit up in the gallery and watch the goings-on down there, and I thought that, the Sergeant-at-Arms would be carrying me out of there on a daily basis. So, now I peaked at the organization when it came to politics.
And then Fidenham was? And
then I joined Fidenham after that, managing the Hudson Bay Centre.
Yeah.
Actually.
Sorry, I'm
just and then with Fidenham, ultimately was looking after all their real estate in their Canadian real estate. So we had apartments in Calgary and Edmonton, and a little shopping center out there, and some buildings on Yonge and the Hudson Bay Centre, and some apartments in Montreal, and we had a centre called Centre Laval in Montreal, just down from Carrefour Laval, which is the Cadillac project. So I was there until I was recruited to Cadillac Fairview in the spring of '84.
So you would have arrived 2 years after the Great Flip?
Yes, exactly right. We were out of all the I think in the final tally, they sold about 13,000 apartment buildings, units rather. And I think at their peak, they were more like 16 or 17,000 units.
And that was really the coming together. Cadillac and the Fairview was the residential company and the commercial company, really. Like Keith Diamond was there at the beginning, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, the Cadillac Construction and Fairview Corporation and Don Mills, they joined together in the early 70s, I guess, and formed Cadillac Fairview. And so you're quite right. A lot of that residential stuff had its roots in the Cadillac organization. Fairview was shopping centers and office, and the two merged, and they continued to grow the residential. In fact, we were into everything at that time. I wasn't there, but we were doing subdivisions, and we did a couple of condos. We did lots of apartments, and then that was all sold in '82. I think was the year that
the great flip.
Yeah.
Was it sold for? I wrote the numbers down because I ended up. I'm not going to talk about myself because it's about Peter, but it's the only time I've ever been on a book, which was called Public Money, Private Greed, about the flip. I sent it to my mother, and she said, "Terrific, you're in a book about crooks." So, but it was sold for $270 to the boys, and after two flips, they sold it to themselves for $500, and it cost the government $131 million. I read, to actually prosecute these guys, so that one guy could spend 12 months in an open prison.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was, that was the new Cadillac sort of emerged once you got rid of all that residential, right? That was
yes, and when that happened, that's when Bernie Gert came in, and he really got the company focused on. Well, he was the guy who made the decision to get out of those, apartment units, and we sold off a lot of second-tier assets, a lot of smaller. Smaller buildings, a lot of international we had spots and bits all over the place. And Bernie was really got the place, let's narrow down our focus and let's concentrate on places where we can make money. Because I think we built the greatest apartment buildings probably ever made, but I don't know that we ever made any money. I think we overbuilt everything pretty dramatically back in those days. But that was... we took that kind of, high-rise office building standard to residential.
Like
it was a little of overkill.
And the whole 9 yards, right? Swimming pools. And there was obviously a pre-established relationship with TD at that point, right? From the TD Center days and cross directorships and the whole.
That's right.
That was a very tight relationship.
It was a very big relationship, and one that was key to Cadillac, both in good times and in more difficult times. Yeah.
And so, what relationship did you inherit when you got there? Was that who was that? Who was that head? Because Charlie Bailey came late.
Oh yes, no, it was Dick Thompson.
Dick Thompson.
Yeah, Dick Thompson was head of the bank at that time, and he was on Cadillac's board, and he took a very keen interest in the TD Center. So my main exposure to him early, I joined the company as the Vice President of Operations for the office group. There were three distinct sort of companies within the Cadillac umbrella back then. There was a guy named Marty Seaton who ran industrial. He was based in Los Angeles, but we had industrial North America wide. Then there was Mike Prentice, who I worked for. He was based in Dallas, and he ran the office side. And then Jim Bullock was in Toronto, and he ran the shopping center side. But they all had their own presidents, and Treasury was a sort of in the holding company, for lack of a better term. But there were three distinct companies with distinct accounting systems, and so it wasn't until '87 when the Bronfmans decided to put the company up for sale, because it had been publicly held up to that point, and they decided to sell their interest. TD and Bank of Nova Scotia, I think, both had significant holdings of stock, and so together they put the company out, and then a Chicago firm named JMB bought and syndicated the company to, I forget, 37 or 38 pension funds. I think the Case was the only Canadian pension fund that got in the deal. And then there was one UK pension fund, and it just escapes me who it was. They weren't big in the deal. And the rest were all US funds. That was in 87.
And that sort of period from when you joined in, and then right through to sort of 1990, these were the real, this is when all of, we were talking about it before, all of the characters, it was the Bronfmans, and it was the
Bob
Reichmans
Campo and the
Campo,
yeah, sure. Well, all through the sort of 70s and 80s, these guys were, these guys were bigger than life.
And Winston's was the place, right?
Winston's was the cafeteria, yeah.
And Joe had it. I mean, you've been friends with Joe Barnacle for a long time.
Long time, yeah.
Joe had his table, right?
He did. There were a number of...
You might want to explain his drinks policy, because I found it fascinating. As a business development tool for the younger members of the audience, I'm not sure you could duplicate it today, but it certainly was interesting.
Well, back in those days, nobody drank wine in those days, but you certainly drank at lunch. And so it was all highballs. And when you went to Joe's table, it was just an unspoken rule. Nobody ever asked you, but when he poured you a drink, if you ordered, argument's sake, I ordered a rum and Coke, it would be a double. That was automatic. You got a double. And then sort of you'd pick this up and you'd have a sip and you'd think, whoo, that's clearly a strong drink. And so you'd sort of sip away at it. And the other rule was that nobody knew about it until you'd been there once or twice, is that when the glass was, halfway down, it was simply replaced with another double. And you'd be talking over here, and then you'd look back and, damn, there's that full glass again. So that was this, and eventually you didn't really care what you were having at that, or agreeing to. Yeah.
But great. I mean, he is almost a quintessential example of a networker supreme, right? Just followed people through career, and from top to bottom, wasn't just the senior guys.
Yeah, in those days, when I first started going there, I was the manager of 69 Yonge Street, but he used to look after Stu Eagles, who was the president and his friend, but he always had time for the guys in the front line, and so, yep, and he knew everybody and remembered everybody. A phenomenal memory he had, which was a great gift.
And would do favors for anybody without...
Yep.
Didn't have to be a payback.
Yep. No,
it would be one day, but
not
not right then.
No, that's for sure. Yeah.